Okay, I think this monitor is going to be really close to endgame potential for a lot of people. This is a 32-inch QD OLED display running at 4K 240Hz. Assuming that you have a beefy enough PC to run it, this is going to be a dream to use. That said, there are some issues with this Alienware monitor that should be noted before you consider dropping $1,200 on it. Let's start by digging into the display itself. This being a 4K OLED is insane. Any game you play in here is going to look fantastic. At 32 inches, you have a 140 ppi pixel density, so everything looks very clear. There is something to be said about the text fringing, but we'll talk about that later when we go over desktop use. This is now my second 32-inch monitor, but previously this gaming setup in the office had dual 27 inches. After making the switch a couple weeks back, I now much prefer this size as an all-around. If you're mainly playing esports titles, this may be a little big for you, but if you do decide on it, having a monitor arm to push it further back would likely be a good idea. Taking this out of the box, it was quite dirty, so I had to wipe it off with the included microfiber cloth, but luckily I didn't have any scratches. I was seeing a lot of posts on Reddit where people were getting this in and even with the replacement covered in scratches. This panel does have a glossy coating, which I'm very happy about because I think it looks a lot better than a typical anti-glare coating. It's of course going to reflect a lot of light, so I can only recommend this if you're playing in a dark room. In addition, it doesn't get very bright. I don't have the exact readings because I had some issues with my colorimeter, but during the day, my office gets fairly bright, so it can be a bit hard to see. With HDR on though, it's much better, and for my use, I recommend the true black mode. Now, HDR actually is where this monitor starts to have some real issues. The first and most annoying being that with it turned on, you can't actually edit any of the related settings in the OSD. Cyberpunk has been the game I've played most in HDR, and when it works as expected, the game looks absolutely gorgeous on this monitor. Playing with Psycho Ray Tracing, I'm hitting around 100 FPS, and the reflections and lighting look amazing. Windows 11 though really does have a lot of problems when it comes to HDR. I keep it on most of the time simply because it is brighter, but when moving around apps, the brightness and color will sometimes shift. This is really weird because it's not something that happened when I hooked up my 14-inch M3 MacBook. A major problem that I've seen talked about is related to Dolby Vision. The monitor will force it on and cause colors on the desktop to appear very washed out. For now, we have no way to turn it off. This is something that's going to come in a firmware update in March. Now, with QD OLED, the black level will rise depending on the lighting situation that you're in. I notice this occasionally depending on the time of day it is or if I'm filming with a key light, as the blacks no longer have that inky color, but more of a gray one. It's not a deal breaker for me because I mostly play at night, and even when I do notice it, it's not super harsh. Now, colors with this monitor are a huge positive. Right out of the box with the default color profile, it looks incredibly accurate. I think that for most of you, if you're not doing any intense color work, will never have to touch this at all. I did buy a colorimeter from Calibrite to tweak the colors further, but I've had some issues trying to set it up with DisplayCal, so if any of you guys know what's going on here, just drop a comment. Now, I've always liked the design of Alienware's monitors, and this one is no different. Really, the only thing I don't like is that the bezels are quite thick, especially when compared to ROG's OLED, but in-game, they aren't distracting. I love how the backside looks, and while I'm not usually a fan of RGBs, do like the lights this display has. The included stand looks quite good in my opinion, and felt pretty solid, but it just took up far too much room on my desk, so I opted instead for a monitor arm. This display is face mountable, so any arm that has a 100 by 100 mount will work just fine. This one from Ergear was pricey at $75, but you're paying for the gas spring that I think is worth the extra money. This just makes moving the monitor around much easier and feels stable. Now, for performance, OLED is going to be fantastic. Response times are near instant, so there's practically no motion blur, and esports titles feel so responsive. The monitor is only G-Sync compatible as it doesn't have the chip, but I've personally not found this to be an issue. So for ports, we have 3 USB-A's, USB-B, USB-C, DisplayPort, and 2 HDMI 2.1s. The USB-C port is unfortunately just 15 watts, meaning that it's only providing enough power to charge devices or connect peripherals. There's no DisplayPort Alt, so you're unable to connect a MacBook or Windows laptop. The DisplayPort version is 1.4, which is the one area that makes the display a little less future-proof. The new 5000 series RTX cards are likely shipping with 2.1 according to rumors, and this would allow you to play at 4K 240Hz without DSC. Now, Alienware doesn't let you turn this off at all, even if you're at a lower refresh rate, which in terms of quality most of the time wouldn't matter, but what this does mean is you can't take advantage of Nvidia's DLSDR downscaling. What this does is render the game internally at a higher resolution, which can make your game look a lot better and more clear. This matters a lot less at 4K, but the main use case that I could have seen was if you're playing older games that already run well enough, and you just want to get rid of any aliasing effects still present. With that aside, I want to talk specifically about the experience gaming with this monitor. Again, simply put, any game you throw on here is going to feel insane. Cyberpunk has been my go-to, and really any single player title is going to be an absolute joy to play at this resolution on a glossy OLED. I do love the versatility of 240Hz though, as games like the finals can get very close to that max refresh rate. Even in a game like Hogwarts where you're closer to 120 FPS, it still feels incredibly snappy, and turning on frame generation, it's difficult for me to notice that added input lag. This monitor does have a 1700R curve, which for some people might be a deal breaker. Me personally, I don't mind it at all, and while it is noticeable, it's not super jarring or something that I ever find distracting. If anything, when I'm in a game like Cyberpunk, just having the display subtly curve around me makes it more immersive. If you want to be doing design work in CAD where you need straight lines, this might not be the best idea, but for video editing and even web design, I think it's perfectly fine. At the back of the monitor, there are fans, but the only time I was ever able to hear them was when I ran a self-diagnostic test. They should automatically kick on if the display gets too warm, but even at the highest L2 setting, they're barely audible. I think that for most people, your PC is probably going to be louder. While I only ever game with headphones, it is worth noting that this monitor does not have built-in speakers. This is annoying because there's been a few times where I don't want to plug in my headphones and just need to listen to something quickly. Now, I wouldn't recommend getting this monitor solely for console gaming, but it makes for a great all-in-one display to have. I usually play on my LG C1 upstairs anyway, but I turned on some Spider-Man 2 and it looks gorgeous. Even just sitting on the PlayStation homepage, the clarity of this display is amazing. With HDMI 2.1, it's able to run at 4K 120 FPS with VRR, which lets you take advantage of both 120 FPS modes, but also 40 FPS fidelity modes in supported games. Just note that it's not able to run at 1440p if that's something you're looking to do. While I don't plan to do it all too much, I have worked a bit on here and it's been really good. I thought the text fringing would be noticeable when writing scripts or shot lists in Notion, but it's not at all. At a normal viewing angle, I can't tell it's there, and it's only when I'm around 8 inches from the screen that I can begin to see it. macOS doesn't always play nice with external displays, but despite my annoyance with no USB-C, the M3 Mac having HDMI 2.1 allowed it to connect perfectly. I did change the scaling to 2560 by 1440 as the text was a bit small, but otherwise it looked great. Burn-in is of course going to be a large concern when it comes to working, as you're gonna have a lot of static elements on the screen. Luckily, Dell does offer a 3-year warranty that covers burn-in, so it gives some peace of mind there. Plus, there are some built-in protection modes that help to mitigate the effects over time. The one you'll use most frequently is the pixel refresh. After every 4 hours, the monitor will recommend you run this for about 6 to 8 minutes. There is also a more drastic panel refresh, but you won't want to do this one very often, otherwise it will negatively affect your monitor. I think you can widely prevent any issues by simply downloading Wallpaper Engine if you're on PC and auto-hiding your taskbar. So for $1,200, this is the single monitor that for me can really do it all. There is a bit of controversy online, which is warranted, but I don't think that you would be unhappy with this monitor. If you're okay with waiting though, both MSI and HP Omen's models look very promising with DisplayPort 2.1, which could make them better future-proof options. All that aside though, I'm really just excited to get back to gaming here, and go ahead and watch my setup video from last week to see all the updates I made to this space. Take care.